I've been playing Fantasy Premier League for over 10 years now, and I started playing more seriously the season that has just finished. Despite this, old habits die hard, and halfway through the season I had a shocking rank of 2.2 million. However, after putting into practice the things that I'm going to tell you in today's video, I picked up green arrows in 14 consecutive weeks and ended the season just outside the top 100k. It's a big one, so let's get into it. Now, before I start, there is one golden rule that supersedes all of today's advice, and it's this. Any piece of advice, any plan, any strategy that you create must be able to go into the bin at any given time. That's football, that's FPL. There is no one strategy or plan for a whole successful season, because that's not what football or FPL is. It's ever changing and ever adapting. You must be flexible and willing enough to just cancel anything. Even in today's video, the advice I'll give you, it might improve your chances of a successful season, but it doesn't guarantee success. There are always situations and exceptions to the rules, and you must be able to go against any usual plan when circumstances dictate. Now that's out of the way, let's kick off with number one, spread the wealth. Now, my plan going into the season is not spending 100 million. I will try to leave just a little bit in the bank, because basically early price rises and price falls. Now, last season I started with triple Bournemouth and the likes of Sigurdsson, all of whom dropped really sharply in the opening few weeks. And a 0.1 million loss is more like a 0.5 million loss at the start of the season. So having just a little bit in the bank can leave you a little bit less stressful. Or the other plan here would be to spread the premium, spread the wealth across all aspects of your pitch. So typical successful formations are 3-4-3 and 3-5-2. So having expensive premiums in defense, midfield, and up front means that you could switch one or two around to go on to the next premium in that category. I personally don't like switching premiums early on. Instead, I will be using the early transfers in the season to find some cheap enablers or cheap players who start the season with a bang. Think Lundstrom last season and Wan-Bissaka the season before that. So when we start with 100 million, people think that you have to spend exactly 100 million. That will bring more success. But actually, that's just not true. So just try and save a little bit of money in the bank for a rainy day. Number two is ignore the social media bubble. Ignore social media madness and things like team selected by, Twitter, template, and FOMO. So it's very easy to fall into the social media trap. FOMO, or fear of missing out, strikes hard when all you see on Twitter is every man and his dog celebrating an Antonio 4-goal haul. Truth is, social media, especially Twitter, is just a small bubble, a small fraction of the entire game. Antonio had about 1% ownership when he destroyed Norwich, but online it felt as if you were the only idiot in the world that didn't predict a 4-goal game for Antonio, despite him only having 4 goals before that point for the entire season. People will call online players for being all squads, even for being template, or think a player isn't worth getting because they have high team selected by percentage. The truth is, none of that matters. Kevin De Bruyne was the highest owned player. I think it was about 50% ownership he had last year, but he was also the highest FPL point scorer. The only thing you need are points. Everything else doesn't matter. If you don't have a player, because a lot of people do have them, but that player keeps getting double-digit hauls whilst you're looking around for the major differential that people don't have, then you're the only one that's losing points. If you have Kevin De Bruyne and he gets 10 points, but you have a lower own percentage guy that gets 7 points, you've just lost 3 points. It doesn't matter about who owns what. It matters how many points you have at the end of the day. If you can find a way, for using Kevin De Bruyne as an example, cheaper to cover his points, then that's fine. But let's be honest, if you would have had KDB all season and captained him all season, you'd probably have more points. And remember, if you have 4 players with high ownership, then individually, yes, 1, 2, 3, 4, they have high ownerships. But if you check online, there's tools that you can check online, that if you put those 4 people into this tool online, it will actually show you how many people have all 4 of those players, and usually those percentages are actually very low. So I remember having Trent Alexander-Arnold, Mo Salah, Kevin De Bruyne, and Raheem Sterling. So these 4 players at the start of the season, especially even to the midway point, they were very, very highly owned. But when I put those into the tool online, it told me that actually not many people had all 4 of those players. So yes, individually, team selected by looks bad, but when you put them all together, only 5% of players have all 4 of these highly owned players. So don't worry about other teams, just find players who score points. Third, keep captaincy simple. Now, I had an awful season in regards to captaincy picks, especially in the first half of the season when my overall rank was also terrible. I think maybe my best player in the first 15 weeks, 2 game weeks out of that, I think I captained my best player. Why? Because I was being a smart ass. Picking the likes of an out-of-form Callum Wilson because of a supposedly favourable fixture, whilst I had the likes of Mo Salah, Raheem Sterling, Kevin De Bruyne and Mane in my side was not a good move. They're premium top players for a reason, so captain one of them basically every week. If you've seen certain stats or form and a player has a great fixture coming up and you fancy that punt, then sure, but make sure that the high owned premiums don't have a lot in their favour and your new captaincy pick does. So for example, if City are playing against Liverpool and Manchester United were at home to Norwich, then yeah, probably the Manchester United pick would be the best option there. But in most other circumstances, you've just got to really be backing your premiums for captaincy. The fourth one on the list is form over fixtures. Now, one player jumps to my mind here, Danny Ings. For too long, I left him out of my side by thinking things like, he can't keep on scoring, he'll get injured soon, or Southampton won't win against this team. But that's bad thinking and that's bad practice. There is nothing to say a player will stop if the stats are there to show they are consistent, or to say that they'll get injured. Yes, you can regard their injury history, but that last season, he was basically fine all year. And it wouldn't matter if Southampton didn't win because I just need Danny Ings to score a goal. And if he does score a goal, likely he'll pick up some bonus points. I think form over fixtures is most true with forwards and maybe some midfielders as well, especially if they're attacking wingers like Salah or Mane, because they are positions which can go on hot streaks more over than a defender or a goalkeeper. And personally, I think these are positions that rely more on confidence and form. So a defender or goalkeeper doesn't keep a clean sheet for a couple of game weeks, fine. But you see a striker not scoring for 5 games, you see their heads dropping, maybe they're trying too hard, or a midfield or forward are more likely to get rotated out. So if a player is playing well, scoring goals, and the stats are consistent, then to an extent, it doesn't matter who they're playing against. Go for the people in form. So I say to an extent, if I didn't have Danny Ings in my team and then they're going away to Liverpool or Anfield for a game week, I'd probably hold off for the game week after that, or he's going to Manchester City. I just think Liverpool and Manchester City are a step above, but anyone else, if they're in hot form, I would probably bring them in. And that's what I'm going to be doing for the coming season. Number 5, don't hold player grudges. I had him earlier in the season. He's let me down once. I'll never bring him in again. How many people probably thought that about Raheem Sterling this season? I held on to him for far too long, but I saw how well he looked right at the start of Project Restart, and I got him in as soon as possible, even trusting him once with my captaincy as he picked up a 42-point haul. Don't let a grudge stop you from getting a player. Football is a fickle game, and a little bit of form can go a long way. A player can start a season well and finish poorly, something Richarlison tends to do well. Usually he starts the season absolutely on fire and trails off at the end of the season. Some can start a season quietly or poorly and finish well. So I think Van Aanholt usually likes a real end of season hot streak. So either way, we're making decisions about players. Judge them on the here and now, not what they did for you 6 months ago or 15 game weeks ago, because again, you're the only one that's going to miss out on points here. Number 6, balance stats and the eye test. So you're not a scout who can pinpoint everything about a player. You're not a professor of math or an analytical statistician. If you're any of these things, then that's amazing, by the way. But for the majority of us, we're not these things. So we need to balance evidence of stats and watching games. You can't judge a player by just watching games, and you can't do it by just looking at numbers on a screen. Use them together, and if a player passes both tests, he's likely a good choice. If you're seeing a player doing a lot of running around and looking hungry, but you see that their heat map is mainly in their own half and they've made 0 forward passes all game, then that's why you need to double check with the stats. If you see a player that had 5 shots and 10 touches in the box, but those shots were from 50 yards away and the touches came when they fell on the ball and kicked it a few times, scrambling around trying to get up, then that's why you need the eye test. So I really think that you need to put these both together. You can't just trust one or the other. So speaking of stats, you'll see a lot of content creators and thread makers online, myself included, try to look good by picking out a stat to prove our point or to make the audience think, wow, their player choice is really good, he looks really well thought out, so I might go and check him out. There are 2 problems there. The first is that those stats were chosen by a person trying to prove their choice is right or smart. So writers, content creators, thread makers, we have an agenda. I'm not saying that it's done to trick you or even done on purpose, but some stats are used to beef up a player and that stat might not really be worth too much. So for example, I mentioned earlier touches in the box. If you take those stats at face value, they're actually useless. A player like Jamie Vardy will take 2 touches in the box and score twice. Mo Salah might also score twice, but take 20 touches in the box. That's because when you watch them play and you know that kind of player, Salah is the kind of person that gets the ball to feet, likes to take a bunch of touches, confuse the defense, get around him and score a goal. Jamie Vardy is the kind of player that gets a through ball, takes 1 touch, and smashes it in the back of the net. If you add context by comparing other stats or by watching the game, then touches in the box might show a player getting in the right positions or having some good opportunities. But only taking stats by themselves might hinder your chances more than actually help them. So I watch pretty much every Premier League game. However, next season I will be more stats focused and I'll put the eye test more into second place, but I'll still keep my gut feeling for certain decisions. But just when you're looking at stats, you need to really think, what does this stat mean? And you can't just take one stat by itself. You need to take other statistics and put them together to see if there is, correlation. You don't just say, oh, he's taken 5 shots, that's great. You need to make sure, where are those shots coming from, and things like what's the XG for that. Next up, try to save 2 free transfers. In the first game week, unless something has gone terribly wrong, you shouldn't have to make a transfer. So from game week 2, you can be sat there with 2 free transfers, and it is incredibly useful to always try and keep 2. First, because it means no hits. If your team is set up well, you can pretty much go for any player in FPL that you want within 2 moves. Second, if you do need a bit of a reshuffle, a 3 transfer move for only a -4 can really revitalize your team for just a small cost. So if you're making this move, the incoming players should be well thought out and planned out, spreading a -4 out over several weeks, and hopefully that should make it worth it. Third, it can cover you in case of injuries and suspensions, again, without having to take hits. Number 9, leave transfers late. Another aspect that splits the community is when to make transfers. Should you make them early to increase value or protect it? Should you do it on the Friday following press conferences, or should you pray for early team news and hold on to the last moments just before the deadline? In the past, I've made early transfers, and more often than not, it's come back to bite me. If you make a Monday transfer, a lot of things can happen before your players play on that weekend or even on Monday Night Football, because it's an entire week. Bringing in a player because he's rising by 0.1 million should not take precedence over points. My advice is to wait for press conferences, or if it's an interesting early kickoff with a lot of your players going to play in that early kickoff, then hold on to just before the deadline. There's a lot of debate about early team news leaks at the minute, but it actually doesn't matter what people's opinions are. Deal with facts. Right now, they are in the game, and for as long as they are there, you're pretty silly not to use them, really. No one will care if you tell people that your rank is 500k, but it's a moral 500k. A point people make is that it's a global game, but at the end of the day, it's the English Premier League, so the deadline should be set for England. And before people think I'm being biased or unfair, I live out in Asia at the moment, so time zone differences are absolutely terrible for me for midweek games. It's 2-3 o'clock in the morning, but that's life, that's the game, and it is what it is. Number 10, don't rage transfer. I can't believe he's got 2 blanks in 2 weeks. He's missed a penalty. They lost to that team. What a terrible performance. Did he even touch the ball this week? Then you're looking at your phone just after the game, the app's open, you check your points, you're hovering over that transfer button. A player that you've not even really had your eye on at all has just bagged 2 goals whilst this muppet is in your team, and he's done sod all for 1 or 2 games. close the app, close it now. Listen to a podcast, play a video game, watch a movie, read a book, chat with your family. Just don't make immediate post-match transfers. I can't remember a time I've made moves like that, and I can't remember a time when it's worked unless it's out of sheer luck. If a player is on the chopping block, then fair enough. Reassess in a day or two and look at the potential transfers. Don't just throw away a player or a free transfer or even take a hit just because of one or two bad games. Remember, you can rewatch highlights, check out the stats. Maybe they weren't as bad as you thought initially. Don't let your heart make those decisions. Number 11, don't take many hits. Plan ahead at like a 3-week minimum and really think about transfers. Not just who you're bringing in, but really think about who is going out. So another community splitting debate topic, hits. Now, remember the advice about the social media bubble that I mentioned earlier? Think about that when I'm talking about this. You see managers taking hits left, right, and center and getting big returns. But they are really the exception to the rule. It's a dangerous and risky way to play, and it rarely pays off. The other all-time FPL top managers and FPL winners rarely take hits. I myself saw a monumental shift just before football stopped due to the coronavirus when I started taking fewer hits. Early on in the season, that bad old habits die hard thing I said in my introduction, because I was still constantly taking -4s and even -8s. But remember that when you're swapping a player for a hit, they have to basically double what your outgoing player is going to do just to make it worth it. I didn't have too much sympathy for people who took out Mo Salah for a hit just as Liverpool were about to go to Brighton, because if it was for a player like Sterling, you're basically saying, even though Sterling was in great form and Salah was looking a little bit tired or whatever, but you were basically saying that Sterling would have to get double the points of Salah in a game against Brighton. Now, in certain cases, yes, a hit is worth it. If you're having an injury crisis or there's suspensions all over the place and you don't have a bench that can come in and fill it in, then I understand. Even an expensive player who is in awful form getting subbed off early, and they're about to hit a typical run of fixtures, that's also fine for me. But I've seen a lot of people taking hits and punts for 1 or 2 game weeks, or taking hits just to get on a possible bandwagon, or even taking hits just to earn a little bit of value. Now, at the end of the day, points is what matter and nothing else. If you're going to take a hit, you have to really think about things. Is the player going out really that bad, or are they just in a little bit of poor form? Are there any stats that are suggesting that they could turn this around? Can they turn their form around? Is this player going to come back, and the new player coming in going to earn those 4 points in just 1 or 2 game weeks? How's the rest of their team doing? Do they have a busy schedule? What about their private life? Is there a rotation risk? And what about what's going on in the coaching staff? Anything. There are so many questions that you need to ask yourself when making any transfer. Not just one for hits. So make a shortlist, really compare those players, rewatch highlights, and then sleep on it, and then make a decision the day after that. Don't just take hits because you want to get the next big player in, because at the end of the day, points are the things that matter. Number 12, join stats websites, communities, and follow the right people. Now, I will always tell people to make their own decisions. I mean, what's the point in just doing what everyone else tells you to do? But one of my favorite things about FPL is the discussions about all things football and all things FPL. Listening to people's suggestions and opinions, weighing them against your own, and making a decision is what it's all about. I enjoy watching, reading, and listening to a lot of content because it's fun and interesting to me. When I'm driving home from work or walking the dog, or I'm exercising or whatever, I'm probably listening or watching something football or FPL related. People might think that it's too much, and people might think there's too much information out there or information overload, but I personally disagree with that. Also, the people in those communities can be very friendly and insightful, and sometimes they can post something really interesting that you might have missed. I honestly think my own community is great. They're very friendly, very welcoming, and a nice bit of banter, which is perfect for me. I would suggest joining a big website like Fantasy Football Scout, not just for the community there, but the members area for getting stats and making player comparisons and team comparisons. I also want to point out I'm not sponsored by them. I'm just telling you what I personally do. Also, Twitter accounts that are must follows for me. You've got Ben Krellin. He's the one that prepares schedules for double and blank game weeks, amongst other things. Ben Dinnery is the key one for injury news, so he's the one to look out for there. And at the minute, FPL Rockstar, he's the greatest one for early team news leaks. Number 13, be chip smart. Now, there's a lot of debate again when it comes to using chips. When to use them, what's too early, what's too late, what order should you use them in, should you save them for blank or double game weeks, or neither. I will still always tell people to play their own way and base decisions on your own squad. And you never know what's going to happen in football or FPL. But I believe the best strategy is this. Triple captain and bench boost should be played during a double game week. Free hit should be played during a blank game week, if you're facing especially a lot of players that are going to be out. This is just the usual plan done to maximize points potential. It's not rocket science. If you've got 15 players on a bench boost playing twice in a week, then that's, double the chance, the most points you can earn. Same for a triple captain. I personally played my own triple captain in game week 1 for Salah just against a single game week against Norwich. So if there are a few, just maybe 2 double game weeks in a whole season, and the fixtures don't look good, but there's a really, really strong single game week, then of course a triple captaincy or bench boost could work. But remember, this is a basic plan, and it's just that. It's the basic, it's the generic plan. You have to be prepared to adapt and make decisions based on your own squad. I'm just trying to give you the general chip strategy that has worked well for a lot of people over the years, and it's the plan that I myself will start with at the start of a season. As for the wild cards, usually the first one is played around the first international break, so about 4 to 5 game weeks into the season. But again, it's based on your own squad. If things are going well and you can hold on to the wild card, then I would massively recommend to do that. Or if you're 3 game weeks in and none of your players are playing, you've got a massive injury crisis, then you might want to activate it earlier than other people. As for that second wild card, it's the same. Hold on to that one for as long as you possibly can. And if you can make it past game week 30 and your wild card is still intact, then you could finish the season very, very strongly. So, track players and follow players that even you don't buy. So you've made a watch list, you've made a short list, and then you don't bring them in, or you just keep an eye on them. Actually follow how they do. Don't just make a thread and then forget about them. If you thought that you found a good player but you couldn't bring them in for whatever reason, follow up on them up until the point that you would have transferred them out, just to see if you were right, because you can actually learn a lot in this game, not just from the decisions that you do make and the players that you bring in, but also the decisions that you didn't make and the players that you didn't bring in. Last up on the list, remember this is in no particular order because it's just general FPL advice. Don't be angry at the result, only the decision. A mantra that I've used all season within my own community, and I know a lot of other people have tried to follow this way of thinking as well. Now there is some luck in FPL, but there's also a lot of planning. But no matter what happens, you cannot fully predict the beautiful game. If you made a decision based on eye tests, statistics, XG, XA, you name it, but your third substitute on your bench, 4 million Fulham defender who hasn't scored in 5 years, bags a clean sheet and a hat-trick away against Liverpool, you shouldn't be too angry about it because the decision was still a right one. Triple captaining an informed Mane or Aguero during a double game week was a good decision in the season that's just gone. It was just really unlucky that they both got injured. That's football, but as long as you made a well thought out decision, based on your eye test and your stats, then try not to focus on the results that don't go your way. You look at it and think, this was still the right decision, I would have made this again 9 times out of 10, then try not to get too angry at the result. So that's my video on FPL advice. Hopefully it's helped you out in making your decisions or your plans that you're going to do for the up and coming season. If you have any advice that you would like to share with the community, please put it down in the comments below. I'm hoping to have videos out in the future like Premier League table predictions and looking when the game is out, looking at prices and looking at the best options for each position. So please keep an eye out for that. Hopefully I'll see you all soon. Hopefully the game's going to get released soon so we can get tinkering with our squads pre-season. Please subscribe by clicking on the link over there, and I'll see you all soon and have a good one.